Thank you everyone for watching our videos on Nicky Scarfo and Frank Sedone. We have more stories to cover the Philadelphia crime family, so stay tuned. However, this time we'll be talking about the impact of what it's like for members of the Philadelphia crime members' families and how it's impacted them. Mark Scarfo was born on November 29, 1970 in Atlantic City to Domenica Scarfo and Nicodemo Domenico Scarfo, better known as Little Nicky Scarfo. Mark's father will be one of the most famous and infamous and vicious crime family bosses in the criminal underworld. Mark Scarfo has been reported to be the youngest child of his parents of 4 children. His oldest brother is his half-brother, Chris Scarfo. He had another half-brother named Garibaldi. These brothers were from his father's previous marriage, Mimi Scarfo. His only full brother was the middle child, who bears his father's name, Nicodemo Scarfo Jr. Mark Scarfo's first paternal cousin is Phil Leonetti, who will be the future underboss of the Philadelphia crime family under Mark's father, Nicky Scarfo. The Scarfo family moved from Philadelphia to Atlantic City, New Jersey, before Mark's birth. Mark's father only lived with his paternal family. The Scarfo family grew up on the North Georgia Avenue in the Ducktown section of Atlantic City. His grandmother, Catherine Scarfo, owned the building and lived there. His aunt, Nancy, whose real first name is Annunziata, but we will prefer her as Nancy, and his cousin, Philip Leonetti, also lived in the building. Despite his father's position within the Philadelphia mob, the Scarfos were not wealthy while Mark was growing up. When Mark Scarfo was 9 years old, 9 days before Christmas in 1979, Concrete and Philadelphia crime family associate Vincent Falcone was killed. Mark would hear the news from the newspapers and radio like everyone else during that time. Mark Scarfo's father and his cousin would eventually be arrested and charged with the murder of Vince Falcone. Unbeknownst to Mark, Philip Leonetti and Nicky Scarfo had been doing killings prior to Vince Falcone's death, but he was too young to understand this devastation that would impact his family. Mark Scarfo, along with the Scarfo family, would see his father and cousin's trials as it was broadcasted live on television each day. At the time, this was unheard of. That's how big this trial was. Mark Scarfo, along with his other siblings, would be mocked in school because everybody knew his family's business. Mark will be bullied and victimized because of the association of his father's accusations. Nicky Scarfo's boss, Angelo Bruno, reigned the godfather of Philadelphia during the time Mark Scarfo was born and grew into his preteens. During the Vincent Falcone murder trial, Angelo Bruno was shot and killed in front of his home. Angelo Bruno's brutal killing will send shockwaves and paranoia to the Philadelphia crime family, including members who were not in it like some of the Scarfo family members, i.e. Mark Scarfo. After the death of Angelo Bruno, Mark Scarfo and his family would see live on television that his father, Nicky Scarfo, cousin Philip Leonetti, family friend Lawrence Merlino will be found not guilty of the murder of Vincent Falcone.
You find Nicodemo Scarfo not guilty, Philip Leonetti not guilty.
Joy was in the air, tears of joy were shed, and celebrations poured into the hearts of the family and friends. Mark Scarfo would hear his father say to the news reporter one of the most memorable lines he is quoted to saying,
"Thank God for the American jury system, an honest jury."
Unfortunately, the celebration would be short-lived. Mark Scarfo hoped that all his pain he endured inside or outside school will be over just like the trial. However, the pain was just postponed. After the trial, Mark Scarfo will be able to join his father and his entourage's vacation. He would go to Florida to enjoy the beach, soak up the sun, and have a good time. However, when he and his family returned back to home, it was back to business. his father went back to his criminal journey. Mark Scarfo's father's new boss was Philip Chicken Man Testa, who was Angelo Bruno's successor, but Chicken Man will be killed in an explosion from a bomb that was placed under his porch. Philip Testa was killed less than a year since Bruno's death. The Philadelphia crime family loses 2 godfathers less than 2 years. Therefore, the commission, the bosses of the 5 families in New York, will honor and choose Nicky Scarfo as the godfather of Philadelphia. Little Nicky Scarfo would reach the pinnacle of his career. Everyone knew the more powerful Nicky Scarfo became, the more paranoid and destructive he would be amongst anyone who crossed paths, including his own son, Mark Scarfo, be to recruit him into the mafia. However, Mark Scarfo would refuse his father's offers, which would rub Nicky Scarfo the wrong way, but he had bigger fish to fry. Nicky Scarfo and his entourage would improvise a street tax to all criminals to pay a percentage of their earnings to the Scarfo crime family for running any illegal activities. If anyone refused to pay Scarfo's entourage, they would be marked for death. Nicky Scarfo would make the sign of a gun. He would shape his hand like a gun as a calling card to notify his entourage that someone was marked for death, and they would take care of it. Therefore, Nicky Scarfo would lead his entourage into a killing spree. He enjoyed the headlines of the victims he wanted to kill. He enjoyed to smile in front of the cameras while being arrested, and he immersed fear into the criminal underworld. On the other hand, not everyone shared his vision. His own criminal family feared him, along with his own biological family. Mark Scarfo would see his father get arrested numerous times. He would be teased again due to all the negative publicity. He would see and hear all the tragic stories that would surround him and his family. His father would publicly go to war with his arch nemesis, Harry the Hunchback Riccobene, because he refused to pay the street tax. Therefore, Scarfo made the sign of the gun for his men to mark Carol Riccobene for death. Nicky Scarfo and Harry the Hunchback were both incarcerated for other criminal charges. Therefore, the leaders will orchestrate their war behind bars. Scarfo and Riccobene street soldiers were killing each other in the streets, causing mayhem and violence that pedestrians and civilians fear for their own safety. One civilian who certainly feared for his life was Harold Riccobene's nephew, Enrico Riccobene. Enrico Riccobene owned his own jewelry store in Jewelers Row in Philadelphia, and he had nothing to do with the mafia. However, he carried the name Riccobene, and therefore he was targeted behind enemy lines. Mark's uncle, Phil Leonetti, Salvatore Salvi Testa, and Lawrence Molino arrived at Jewelers Row. It was around Christmas time, and Leonetti was looking for a watch for his girlfriend. The gang would notice that Enrico Riccobene was running one of the jewelry stores. Enrico Riccobene made sure that the doors were locked so that customers needed to be buzzed in to get accessed. When Leonetti and Testa tapped onto the window, Enrico Riccobene realized who these mafia soldiers were, and he panicked. The street soldiers would glare through the window and continuously banged on the door. For this reason, Enrico walked to the back of the store where he could not be seen. He saw and picked up a loaded gun. At this moment, Enrico Riccobene refuses to point the gun at the gang members. Instead, he points the gun at his own head and he shot himself. He died on the scene. The tragic death of Enrico Riccobene would send shockwaves to the Riccobene family and the world that was watching, including Mark Scarfo, based on the news you will see here.
Enrico Riccobene killed himself right after he saw Philip staring at him through a store window. And when Pat the cat failed to show up for a hit, Nicky made sure Pat took the fall and...
Jewelers Row was bustling with holiday business today, but merchants on the block remain jumpy. This closed jewelry store was a reminder of yesterday's suicide by 27-year-old Enrico Riccobene, the nephew of reputed mob figure Harry Riccobene, whose faction is currently at war with other segments of South Philadelphia's trigger-happy underworld. Police sources tell me that Enrico, who owned this store, the place where he shot himself yesterday afternoon, had no apparent business connections with the crime syndicate. But police sources tell me Enrico was frightened and had been told by lawmen as well as mob figures that he was a potential target for a hit. Just 9 days ago, his uncle Robert Riccobene, known by police to be involved in mob gambling activities, was assassinated. Enrico Riccobene's father, Mario, and Mario's brother, Harry, are in prison now. And though Enrico is said to be clean, his bloodline apparently made him a marked man. Few merchants would talk about the latest Riccobene to die.
He seemed like a gentleman and a young man minding his own business, and that's all I can say at this time. I don't want to say too much more.
The theory by authorities is this guy was intimidated to death, that he operated a clean business.
I wouldn't know anything about his business.
Police are certain that the pressure, stress, and danger of being a Riccobene these days was too much for Enrico, even if his business was not the business that made other members of his family so infamous. Vernon of Channel 6 Action News on Jewelers Row.
Harry Riccobene was very devastated, distraught, and depressed over the news of his nephew and other members, including his own brother, Robert Riccobene. His raw emotions caused and convinced him to surrender in the war, and Nicky Scarfo was declared the winner, and his prizes will be Harry Riccobene's assets and lucrative operations. Around this time, Scarfo was elated about the tragedies and was being released from prison, as you can see here. He was free, lucrative, and a cheerful man. However, in the life of the mob, happiness is very short-lived. Mark Scarfo would see his older brothers cross different paths. His oldest brother, Chris Scarfo, would leave the Scarfo family due to their father bullying him into joining the mob. On the other hand, Mark Scarfo's other brother, Nicky Scarfo Jr., would follow in his father's footsteps. He would be a part of the Philadelphia crime family along with his father and cousin. However, Mark Scarfo did not want to be a part of the life. He enjoyed sports and he wanted to be a good person in society. However, his father would be not fond of it at all. Nicky Scarfo would chastise his son Mark by calling him a jerk-off, a no-good kid, and other epithets that would evoke the same pain he would suffer from his school and bullies. Mark Scarfo knew he would never win his father's approval. Mark Scarfo knew his father liked the killings. The Scarfo family knew that Nicky Scarfo placed a hit and killed his own captain, Salvatore Salvi Testa, Philip Leonetti's best friend, due to his own paranoia. Mark knew his father liked to have a kill as a calling card to send a message to the criminal underworld. Therefore, Mark wanted to send a message of his own to his father by doing an unthinkable maneuver. November 1st, 1988, would be the day that changed Mark and his family's life forever. So what happened on November 1st, 1988, Phil Leonetti said it on Value Entertainment that we send you the screenshot right here and the link below if you want to see the full video. He described the situation that when Mark Scarfo was by himself alone on 26 North Georgia Avenue, the home of Scarf Inc., that he was depressed. He was depressed so bad that when he came across a noose, he was crying and shed so many tears thinking about the decision he decided to make. He walked around the bathroom, got a rope, and the next thing he did, he placed pictures on a bed in one of the bedrooms in the apartment, and the pictures will include Philip Leonetti and other loved ones. And then he decided to wrap the noose around his neck. Before he decided to hang himself, he left a note. He held his father completely responsible for what he was about to do. He not only did he hang himself, he also left a note, and then he signed it, "Your jerk-off son." We will now read from the perspective of Phil Leonetti's book, Mafia Prince. A few days later, after we beat the Testa case, I was out in the yard playing basketball, and my uncle comes over and motions for me to come over to where he was standing. He says, "I've talked to Bobby Simone," who was the lawyer, "and he thinks that there's a good chance that you can make bail and get out of here." So I said, "Wow, that's great news." And he replies, "If you do this, I want you to slit that mother throat when you get home." That mother that Scarfo was referring to was his wife, the mother of his two youngest sons, Nicky Jr. and Mark. So one day while the Crow, Nick the Crow Caramandi, was on the stand, we took our regular afternoon break. We will all go back into the holding pen, and there were these little conference rooms we could meet with the lawyers. They come back. So Bobby Simone comes back and calls me and my uncle into one of the conference rooms and says, "I got some bad news." And you could just tell by looking at Bobby that this was bad. It was written all over his face. Then Bobby says, "Nick, you're going to sit down for this one." And my uncle says, "What is it, Bob?" And Bobby says, "Mark tried to kill himself this morning. They found him hanging in the bathroom of Scarf Inc. They flew him from Atlantic City to Philadelphia on a helicopter, and he's at ICU at Hahnemann Hospital. It doesn't look good." I remember welling up with tears and feeling nauseous like I was going to throw up. This kid was 17 years old and was a beautiful kid, well-behaved, good-looking, always respectful. He was my uncle's youngest son, his baby, and as Bobby's telling us this, Bobby's choked up. I got tears in my eyes, and my uncle, this no good evil motherfucker, has absolutely no reaction, no emotions, nothing. He's just standing there and he doesn't say a word. A few minutes later, the judge brings us all back into the court and announces the court is in recess for the day. You can see all the lawyers are whispering to the clients, telling them what happened. And every one of them had the same reaction. They looked sick about it. Even the judge and the prosecutors who hated my uncle looked sick. How could you not be when a 17-year-old tries to kill himself? But my uncle, this sucker, never flinched, never batted an eye. So now we all going back to the holding pen in the basement and waiting for the bus to go back to Holmesburg. No one gets saying a word. Every day after court, when we were heading back, we always be breaking balls. You gotta remember, there were 17 of us, and we're all looking, suspending in the rest of our lives. So we had to do something to lighten the mood, but on this day, no one said nothing. It was dead fucking silence. And then, when we all got into the holding pen and sat on the bench waiting for the bus to come out of the nowhere, my uncle went nuts and exploded on me. His eyes got real big and he was pointing at me and said, "You know, I blame this on you and your mother. The way she would scream and holler at Mark and that vein that would come out of her neck, this is your fault. You and that witch sister of mine. You just like her." And then he mumbled something in Italian to himself. While this was going on, all the guys we were on trial with were all sitting on the benches that were up against the wall, staring straight at the floor. It was almost like we had it made easier for them to convince us. How could they not, with everything they heard? I know this sounds crazy, but when they found us guilty, I felt a huge sense of relief. I knew that we were finished. I knew that this life, La Cosa Nostra, was over for me. Nicky Scarfo Jr., who was running the day-to-day operations of a now decimated crime family with Anthony, cousin Tony Piccolo, Scarfo Sr.'s first cousin, came to visit both Scarfo and Philip Leonetti behind bars a few days after the verdict. Nicky Scarfo Jr. comes in and he's telling me and my uncle what is going on in the streets. He said nobody's paying. There's no structure anymore. It's every man for himself. I went and saw Bobby the other day and I told him what was going on, and my uncle says, "What'd he say?" And Nicky says he said it was over and that you had no shot on an appeal. My uncle said, "Nothing is over. As long as we're still breathing," and he points to me and him, "you tell that to Bobby and anyone else who thinks it's over. As long as we're around, "It ain't over," and Nicky Jr. just nodded. I said, "How's Mark doing?" And Nicky Jr. said, "He says he's in a coma, but the doctor says he's gonna make it, and that maybe we can bring him home." Nicky Jr. was the only one of the Nicky Scarfo's 3 sons who gravitated towards La Cosa Nostra. Chris had legally changed his name and was working as a legitimate businessman in Atlantic City area, having very little, if anything, to do with his imprisoned father. Scarfo's youngest son, Mark, still a teenager, remained in a comatose state following a suicide attempt on November 1st, 1988, in the middle of his father's RICO charge. Nicky Scarfo Jr. has a young wife, 2 young children, and both his mother and his brother, who is still in a coma after almost 24 years living in his house. From what I've been told, a group of nurses come by the house and help my uncle's wife take care of Mark. I don't know that families will survive if Nicky gets convicted. They're barely surviving now. My cousin Nicky Scarfo Jr. is not a gangster, and he never was. The only thing he's guilty of is being a loyal son to my uncle. According to Phil Leonetti's interview, he stated that it was his mother, Nancy Leonetti, who found Mark Scarfo hanging, and she immediately called for emergency to help him. He was 17 years old, and he was trying to take his own life away to be freed from all the insufferable pain. As a result of surviving his suicide attempt, the damage was done, and he spent most of his life being incapacitated. So after 26 years of Mark's tragedy, he died on March 18, 2014 at the age of 43. A couple years later, his father, Nicky Scarfo, would die in 2017.
I tell you, what gave me the strength to call the government, though, is when my cousin Mark hung himself. Because after that, I said, hell with this stuff. I can't take it anymore. I'm worried about my son, because my son was best friends with Mark Scarfo. The kid wanted to be a normal kid, but around our family, you can't be normal growing up. You have to live the way his father wanted him to live. 17-year-old kid. Didn't want him to play sports in school. Say, you're a jerk, don't you play sports in school. Mark wanted to work for somebody, like delivering bread. No, you ain't working for nobody that degrades him. He wanted him to be a La Cosa Nostra member before he grew up. The kid that wanted to be a kid first. He didn't want to get involved with this. He didn't want this. He wanted to be a normal kid. So one day, he went into the bathroom of my office and hung himself, like out of the clear blue sky, like just like that. Didn't show no signs of anything being wrong, or that was it. That's how he held everything inside, this kid. He went into the bathroom of my office and hung himself. I ratted, I guess that's the only way to say it. I informed, I testified for the government. I made an agreement with the government to cooperate. If they help my family, if they moved my family and got my son situated, got him out of that life, and moved him somewhere so I could get his life back on track.
Before we end this video, we want to thank you for watching it to be educated and entertained. However, due to the sensitive topics of this video, we just want to end this video on a positive note. Please stay positive. Staying positive doesn't mean you have to be happy all the time. It means that even on hard days, you know that there are better ones coming. Due to YouTube policies, this video cannot be monetized when it comes to the subject of suicide. However, we made this video because we feel that it is crucial that people should be aware of these kind of stories and how it's impacted humanity. We do accept donations on Cash App to username $iLead2020. Any donation that we receive for this video will be donated to the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, previously known as the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Therefore, we can prevent tragedies like Mark Scarfo and Enrico Riccobene, and many loved ones that we know. Suicide doesn't end the pain, it just passes it on to someone else. Please be healthy, stay safe, God bless you, and thank you for your time. We love you.
Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and check out more of our content. Feel free to give your feedback and suggestions on who we should do next in the comments. This is Infinitely Productions. We love ya!